There's a moment that tests every scholar. It's the point where theory slams into reality, where the neat lines of an academic argument are smeared by the messy, unpredictable, and often brutal truth of human experience. You can spend a lifetime studying conflict, power, and social fractures from a safe distance, but to truly understand it, you might just have to stand in the middle of the fire. For one of the world's greatest historians, that fire was ignited in Kuala Lumpur, and it would forge the lens through which he saw everything. On June 8th, 2025, the world just got a little less curious. Professor Anthony Reid, 85 years old, left us. And trust me, calling him a historian feels like calling a master chef a cook. He was a legend, a monumental figure whose work didn't just add to history, he practically rewrote it, carving out a new, more honest narrative for Southeast Asia. You're watching Explaining Malaysia, a video essay project exploring the soul of Malaysia through primary sources. I'm your host, Mr. Kuala Lumpur. Today, we're not just talking about a historical figure, we're talking about someone whose mind shaped the understanding of this entire region. His name is Anthony Reid. And while the academic world knew him as a giant, his story has a deep visceral connection to Kuala Lumpur. This isn't just a tribute, it's an exploration of how one man's journey through the defining crisis of the city witnesses a singular change in history. You'll hear Reid called an Indonesianist, and sure, his work on Indonesia was vital, but the man's intellectual appetite was bigger than that. He didn't see modern borders, he saw the whole damn thing, the Nusantara, the Malay archipelago, as one breathing, interconnected world. Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, the Philippines, it was all part of one sprawling, messy, magnificent story he was determined to tell. Born in New Zealand, educated at Cambridge, his first obsession was the brutal power struggles of 19th century Sumatra, a place deeply tied to the peninsula I call home. But the theory and the archives, that was just the appetizer. The main course was about to be served. In 1965, a young 20-year-old Anthony Reid lands in Kuala Lumpur. He joins the history department at the University of Malaya, living in faculty housing in Petaling Jaya. This wasn't some cushy expat gig, this was immersion. Southeast Asia of the 60s was a time of dynamism. Saying he was just teaching history wouldn't cut it. Here he was breathing the air of a young, turbulent nation trying to find its feet. And then came the night that forged him. The night this country's history's darkest ghosts came. May 13th, 1969. The blackest moment in Malaysia's young history. Reid was planning a casual department dinner to welcome a new colleague. Then the phone rang. He recalls, "The first thing we knew was a phone call from our Malay colleague Zainal Abidin Wahid, who said, 'You'd better not go. There's trouble in KL.' If you'd like to support Explaining Malaysia, please feel free to join my Substack for updates and transcripts. We also have a tip jar on Ko-fi. Lastly, your comments and engagement help YouTube show this video to more people, so please subscribe and share this channel. Imagine that call. The city was on fire. At home, like everyone else, Reid and his family were glued to the radio, listening to the hopelessly sanitized government reports, trading rumors with neighbors, trying to piece together a nightmare. But the story of what happened to the colleagues who didn't get that call is also a chilling snapshot of the chaos that was swallowing the city. Reid gives a harrowing account of two other lecturers less connected to the local grapevine who innocently went to the dinner. They both went to the dinner, and the guy at the restaurant started serving them a meal, but after a while, they saw flames outside as the place was just across the road from Kampung Baru. The restaurant guy didn't offer any help, so they tried to get home themselves. They were faced by military roadblocks and had guns pointed on their face. One of them ended up in the PJ police station for the night. Amidst the fear and the gunfire, a truck pulled up at UM. It wasn't soldiers or rioters, it was from the university, and it was delivering chickens. Reid would find that moment surreal, that while lectures had stopped, debates were silenced, yet in a Malaysia that was tearing itself apart, chickens were still delivered on time. The absurd moment with the chicken highlighted the helplessness of being tried. But for a historian, being powerless was a kind of agony. Reid felt a profound intellectual and deeply human need to break through the wall of sanitized government reports and whispered rumors. He had to see it for himself. During the curfew, we just stayed at home. We started to hear on the grapevine that a lot of Chinese had been killed. Probably on the 15th, I heard from the radio that they need volunteers to help distribute emergency supplies, so I rang the number. I was extremely eager to find out what on earth is going on. I was amazed that they did come to pick me up. They didn't blanch at my foreign name. So we got on that truck, a historian venturing out of the archives and into the terrifying present. What he saw was not an abstract historical event, but a cityscape of fresh wounds and a single haunting image of its human cost. I got onto the back of this truck with 3 or 4 other people where there were bags of rice. And we went to places in downtown and we heaved the bags of rice off at different places. I found one photo I took. It's just an empty street with burned down houses and shop houses. But I did see one body on the road of which I didn't dare take a photo. I assumed he was Chinese, facing down. Think about that. A historian, a man whose job is to document, seeing a truth too raw to even capture. He was out there for just a couple of hours, but it was enough. It was a brutal, first hand lesson in how quickly things can fall apart. His brief time on the streets confirmed what many were beginning to suspect. The very forces meant to restore order were compromised. The evidence, he later learned, was written on the bodies of the victims themselves, and the city's relief at the arrival of a neutral force told its own story. The evidence was reported that when people took the early victims to the hospital, they had suffered from parangs, but later it was guns. The Chinese were being killed by gunfire, so clearly it was the military. Therefore, someone was wise enough to bring in Sarawak Rangers, as the latter were presumably predominantly Iban, or at least mixed and presumed to be neutral. People were really saying, thank God the Sarawak Rangers are here. And when the curfews finally lifted, the trauma didn't just disappear. It lingered in the air, changing the very atmosphere of the university. Reid witnessed how the violence had resurrected older, more primal beliefs among a shell-shocked student body. I remember teaching some classes, and some people were still a bit shell-shocked by that whole experience. There was one Malay student in my class talking about people who are cabal, invulnerable, about certain mystical practices. Suddenly, he said, people who knew about Silat, Malay martial arts, became leaders, and these martial arts became very popular. Everybody wanted to study them, and suddenly there was an interest in violence. And in the aftermath, Reid observed something deeply profound, a palpable shift in the very fabric of society. He reflected on how before 1969, there was often an unspoken empathy between Malays and Europeans, a shared concern over Chinese communism. But overnight, it changed. That was almost overnight replaced by empathy between non-Malay as victims and the foreign observers, he said. He recalled how foreigners were often struck by the warmth of rural Malays, contrasting it with what he called the relatively rude Chinese, a perception that changed. It really changed. Frustrated at being stuck powerlessly at home while these horrific events unfolded, I decided all I could usefully do was write the whole issue up, at first to channel my despair, but gradually to seek to understand and explain. I wasn't a journalist writing about what happened on May 13th. I was supposed to be a historian to make sense of it all. That raw, lived experience in KL didn't just define a chapter of his life, it became the foundation for his life's work. It gave him the lens. After Malaysia, he went on to build intellectual empires. To call him a scholar would be understating it. He was an architect of studies, the founding director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at UCLA, then the founding director of the Asia Research Institute at NUS in Singapore. The man didn't just join and reinforce institutions, he created them. He built the very rooms where the next generation of scholars could argue, research, and understand. So, what was his big idea? The one that blew the doors off Southeast Asian history? Before Reid, the story was simple and, frankly, insulting. It was a Eurocentric fable that basically said nothing important happened here until the white guys showed up with their ships and flags. Reid called bullshit on that narrative. He argued that from 1450 to 1680, long before colonialism truly took hold, Southeast Asia was experiencing a vibrant, dynamic age of commerce. This wasn't some sleepy backwater. This was a world of booming port cities, massive economic growth, and profound cultural change, all happening on its own terms. It was a powerful counter narrative that gave the region back its own history, its own agency. But his greatest legacy might not be in a book, it might be in the people he lifted up. Reid was famous for his generosity, for mentoring young scholars, especially those from Southeast Asia. He knew their path was harder. He didn't just teach, he guided. He opened doors. A colleague once said his heart was in Southeast Asia, truly belonging to the region. He wasn't a visitor, he was family. Anthony Reid taught us that history isn't dead. It's the ghost in the machine. The patterns he saw, the fault lines he witnessed firsthand on the streets of KL in 1969, they still inform the challenges we face today. To understand the world now, you have to understand the world that was. So if you want to truly understand the deep history of Malaysia and the world it belongs to, you have to read his work. It's not just for academics, it's for anyone who's curious. Here's where you start. First, his masterpiece, Southeast Asia in the Age of Commerce. It's a 2-volume beast, but it will change how you see everything. If you want a brilliant single-volume overview, grab A History of Southeast Asia, Critical Crossroads. Trust me, you won't just be reading history, you'll be meeting its ghosts. And then go deeper with imperial alchemy, nationalism, and political identity, on how nations like Malaysia and Indonesia, often bruised by colonialism, forged their distinct identities. There's also the Chinese diaspora in the Pacific, their pivotal, often understated role across the region, a topic hugely and constantly relevant to Malaysia's complex multi-ethnic fabric. He even delved into environmental history and, with deeply human empathy, the profound societal impacts of the devastating 2004 tsunami. So thank you, Professor Reid, for charting the map, for telling the story, for writing with so much heart and intellect about it. What's the one historical event or book that completely changed your perspective on Malaysia or Southeast Asia? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. If you found this meaningful, do all the YouTube things, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with anyone who loves a true story. See you next time.